Despite warm weather and calm seas, hundreds of migrants continue to drown crossing the Mediterranean. A new tablet is a classroom in a box. And artists travel to Namibia to get up close and personal with some surprising models. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now we begin in Senegal, where former Chadian President Hissène Habré was sentenced to life in prison by a court in Dakar. Habré was found guilty of crimes against humanity for ordering the killing and torture of thousands of political opponents during his 8-year rule, which ended when he was ousted in 1990. Habré was sentenced by the Special African Chamber, a tribunal created in 2013 by Senegal and the African Union. He was also convicted of rape. The verdict caps a 16-year battle by victims and rights campaigners to bring the former strongman to justice in Senegal, where he fled after being toppled in a 1990 coup. The case centered on whether Habré ordered the large-scale assassination and torture of political opponents and ethnic rivals. A 1992 Chadian Truth Commission accused Habré's government of up to 40,000 political murders, as well as systematic torture, mostly by his feared intelligence police, the Documentation and Security Directorate. He has 2 weeks now to launch an appeal. Well, journalist Alpha Jallo was in the courtroom when the verdict was read and now joins me by phone from Dakar. Alpha, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Now, first tell us, what was the reaction when he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison?
Well, it was a total happiness from the victims and the families of the victims. At the moment the verdict was, pronounced, they were shouting and embracing each other in the court. So they were very happy that once again that the strongman, Italian former strongman, was convicted by an African court on an African soil. So they were all happy.
Which is really unprecedented, but it has taken about 20 years for this to happen. What were the challenges?
Well, there was a lot of challenges according to the human rights organizations in Senegal, like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. They said that the process took so long and it was very unprecedented because there were so many witnesses about many of them who were not even, they are no longer alive, but their families, so they were cross-examining. So many people were auditioned, and this is the reason that's why the Habré trial took so long. As we may know, that Habré was first indicted by a Senegalese judge in 2000. But for the next 12 years, the Senegalese government of former President Abdoulaye Wade subjected the victims of what the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Archbishop Tutu, for 117 groups from 25 African countries. So this has taken so long because, according to the judges, that they have been interviewing so many people, and it was also very difficult to bring all these witnesses to Senegal to attend the trial.
Indeed. We know that Mr. Habré was very defiant and actually said he did not recognize this court. Nevertheless, what is the message to other, perhaps former leaders who may have fled to other countries?
Yes, this is exactly what the human rights organizations such as Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch said, that this is, the verdict is seen as a major step forward by those who are still campaigning for African leaders to be tried in the continent for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And they also added that this would be an eye-opener for African leaders who are torturing their people, who are also subjecting their people to all inhumane, to all things. And they said that this will really be this will teach them a good lesson that they know that they cannot, go, whatever crime they have committed, they cannot go unpunished.
Indeed, this was a historic kind of verdict. Alpha, thank you very much for reporting there. Alpha Jallo reporting live from Dakar in Senegal. Now, hundreds of migrants have died and thousands rescued in the past week alone as warm weather and calm seas encourage many to attempt the perilous journey across the Mediterranean Sea in search of a better life and safety in Europe. More than 700 migrants have drowned in the past 10 days between Libya and Italy. Now, survivors report abominable treatment at the hands of smugglers. Larissa Hoke has more.
An Italian Navy vessel with hundreds of rescued migrants arrived in the southern Italian mainland port of Reggio Calabria on Sunday. The Vega also brought 45 bodies of people who perished during the journey across the Mediterranean. The survivors, most of them dressed in white suits, were met by emergency personnel as they disembarked the ship.
We were able to provide medical care to the migrants on board thanks to the doctors the Navy makes available to us. And we also provided clothing to the migrants, particularly to those who had lost theirs in the shipwreck. We also provided hot meals.
The United Nations commended Italy for the extraordinary effort to save lives.
The Italian Navy has been doing a fantastic job. They have rescued about 14,000 people so far this week. But unfortunately, there have been a number of incidents where people have lost their lives. And in 3 separate shipwrecks, we estimate that 700 people might have died or are still missing.
Officials say most of the people on board the shipwrecked vessels were from sub-Saharan Africa. Survivors say the smugglers who ran the boats made no attempts to save passengers from drowning.
It seems that on Wednesday night, at least 2 fishing boats and a rubber boat left the Libyan coast. One of the fishing boats carried around 500 people, and it towed the smaller fishing boat with some 400 people on board. On Thursday morning, the smaller boat, the one that did not have a motor and was being towed, started to take on water. Some people managed to jump in the water and reach the larger boat, and some were even able to climb up the tow line. Very few people. The tow line was then cut and the smaller boat sank.
Italian authorities have arrested 4 suspected smugglers, including a Sudanese man who commanded the towing boat and allegedly ordered passengers to cut the tow line linked to the sinking boat. According to the UN Refugee Agency, about 200,000 people have crossed the Mediterranean so far this year. And before this latest tragedy, about 1,700 had been reported dead or missing. Larissa Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Now, for more on the migrant crisis, journalist Josephine McKenna joins me live via Skype from Rome. Now, Josephine, we know that this is a massive operation there of rescue and, of course, recovery of the bodies. What can you report? What's happening right now?
Well, Vincent, as you can imagine, when those bodies disappear, it becomes incredibly difficult for the Italian Navy, the Coast Guard and other vessels to try and find them. And as you said, around 14,000 people were rescued last week. We think, based on what UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is saying, around 700, perhaps more, lost their lives. And to actually try and recover those bodies, I think, is a tall order, even though some have been recovered at the scene during the rescue operations. So it is a very difficult situation for the authorities to try and find those missing bodies.
And now we know as the weather gets better, it gets worse. Where are the Italian authorities taking these thousands of people arriving on the shores of Italy?
Well, it's a huge wave, as you can tell, that's just arrived in the last week, and the migrant centres here in Italy are really feeling the strain. There was a bit of a riot at one of the centres in Palermo today where migrants barricaded themselves in. They said they weren't getting enough food and enough medical care. Up in the north of Italy, one of these makeshift migrant tent camps on the border of France was cleared out by authorities, and those migrants, around 100 migrants, were taken in by the local Catholic Church there. So there is a bit of a reaction going on. Some politicians are calling this an invasion, which is quite an emotional term, and some communities don't want more migrants. We saw an interesting poll come out today. Around 1/3 of Italians interviewed in this survey said that they think the migrants should be sent back. So there's some very strong political views across the spectrum right now in Italy, even though the Italian Navy and the Coast Guard are doing a great job rescuing these people who are so desperate.
Now, very quickly, we know that, this is almost kind of what was expected to happen at this time. How are the authorities there preparing themselves? I mean, it is something that is happening, was expected.
Well, it is a major operation. It is expected at this time of year when the weather conditions become more acceptable for making this voyage, even though these voyages are incredibly dangerous. There's a major coordination effort underway between the Italian Navy, the Italian Coast Guard, the European Union vessels, and other NGOs like SOS and Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, who all send boats to this area. And one of my friends was on an SOS boat last week where they winched to safety a tiny baby up into a helicopter who needed desperate medical care. And that gives you some indication of just the lengths that these Italian Navy and Coast Guard officials are going to try and save lives and give these people a fresh start in Europe.
Indeed, a dire situation. Josephine, thank you very much for your report.
Thanks, Vincent.
Josephine McKenna reporting live via Skype from Rome. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vincent Makori. Coming up, using technology to bridge the learning gap across Africa. Stay with us.
This is BizBeat.
Vinyl records produce sound the old-fashioned way, with a needle running on vinyl. But vinyl's turning the tables on CDs and iPods now, as there's a growing worldwide demand for records. Robert Maley is a DJ and record store owner. He says people are fed up with the virtual music. They want the same experience as their parents, to take a record from the cover and put it on a turntable. Demand's so high for vinyl these days, a 65-year-old Czech company is opening a new factory in Canada to keep up with the market. Michael Sturba is the Director General of GZ Media. He says at the moment we export an absolute majority of what we make, and a third of our production ends up in North America. It's estimated 100 million records were sold around the globe last year, and GZ's sales of vinyl have gone from nearly 14 million records in 2014 to what they expect will be 25 million this year. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
Well, Sudan's Janjaweed, a force blamed for mass murders and extensive violence in the Darfur region of that country more than a decade ago, has been turned by Sudanese President Omar Bashir into an auxiliary of his official army and put to work fighting insurgents in that East African state's Nuba Mountains. Now, this report was done with the assistance of Nuba Reports. This is a group of young Western journalists who are living and working in the middle of this conflict. VOA's Jeffrey Young has details.
The Janjaweed soaked the ground with blood in Sudan's Darfur region from 2003 to 2008, killing thousands and inflicting terror. What happened then has been termed war crimes and genocide by the International Criminal Court. Now, this vicious militia has an official paramilitary role established by Sudanese President Omar Hassan al-Bashir and is attacking his opponents in the ongoing conflict in Sudan's Nuba Mountains. Bashir's deployment of the Janjaweed militia in Nuba reflects the government's support for the militia's murderous ability, according to Nuba Reports journalist Ryan Boyette, speaking via Skype.
So when the fighting started here, the Sudan government and Bashir utilized the Janjaweed, trained them, equipped them better, gave them vehicles, and called them the Rapid Support Force. And now they are using them for the past 3 years in the Nuba Mountains to attack the SPLM North.
The SPLM North is the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement North, which consists of elements of the anti-Bashir SPLM that remained in Sudan after South Sudan was established as a separate nation in 2011. NubaReports.org says the conflict in the Nuba Mountains has killed thousands of people and displaced nearly 400,000 over the past 5 years. It also says Bashir's government has blocked humanitarian aid and journalists' access to the region, causing this conflict to be not very visible to the world community. The Sudanese president's strategy for using the Janjaweed there is detailed via Skype by Royal United Services Institute analyst Ewan Lawson.
Bashir has consistently, as his counterinsurgency strategy, used a tactic of intimidation, of fear, of terror. And it is much easier to achieve that for him by using the Janjaweed in places like the Nuba Mountains.
Along with the direct violence inflicted by the Janjaweed in Nuba, Bashir also uses starvation there as a weapon against his opponents, says Ryan Boyette.
Using food as a weapon of war has been a tactic of Bashir's regime for many years, even in the past wars. Now they will bomb and target farms when it's harvest time.
Because of what happened in Darfur, the International Criminal Court at The Hague issued an international arrest warrant for Omar al-Bashir in 2009 and a second warrant the following year. The Sudanese president, as leader of his government's military forces and as the employer of the Janjaweed, is accused of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of genocide with specific intent to eradicate certain ethnic groups. The United States is not a signatory to the 1998 Rome Statute that created the ICC, so Washington is not legally bound to act upon Bashir's ICC arrest warrant. However, the United States has in the past denied Bashir's visa requests to attend the United Nations General Assembly. Recently, the Sudanese president once again requested a U.S. visa. State Department spokesperson Mark Toner offers this response.
We've seen this happen before, this threat or this gesture that he's going to apply for a visa. We'll look at it, obviously, and address it within our legal obligations.
So for now, Omar al-Bashir conducts himself and his counterinsurgency operations in Nuba with impunity. And there, Ryan Boyette says people feel abandoned by the rest of the world.
No one is doing anything about it. No one is coming to their help. No one is answering their calls for help. And it's very discouraging. They felt like they do feel like they've been left alone. And they don't really think the international community is standing by them or their needs.
And as analyst Ewan Lawson points out, the African Union and other multinational groups do not seem to want to take action against one of their own, regardless of the seriousness of the situation. Jeffrey Young, VOA News.
Well, now a tablet computer ready to change lives of primary school children in Africa. That's the promise of the so-called KioKit, tablets with educational software. It is developed in Kenya and is used for teaching lessons. Now, our correspondent, Ruud Elmendab, went to a school in an informal Nairobi settlement to see children learning on the KioKit.
Imagine a suitcase that carries an entire primary school curriculum in its belly. Chances are high you'll see the so-called KioKit here in use in a primary school in Nairobi.
You fit the bag of the earphone and the tablet.
No need for exercise books and ink pens anymore, since inside the KioKit there are tablet computers that have everything that the children need to learn.
Do you like and enjoy learning with tablets? Yeah! Sit down now, no standing.
On these child-friendly tablets, the children learn the school topics via quizzes, pictures and videos. For example, here biology. And according to teacher Josephine, the children are picking up the new technology well.
And it is easier to learn because it has the pictures which they are really enjoying. And we are saying it's a good program.
The virtual world of the tablets is in stark contrast with the real world outside. This area is considered a slum where unemployment is high. Most parents here can't afford good education for their children, resulting in school dropout rates as high as 40%. For these children, the tablets hold the promise for a better education. But there is a downfall: games. Raising the question whether the students can resist playing on the tablets instead of learning. Nivi Sharma is the director of KioKit. She says they were aware of this dilemma and created a division between learning and playing.
So in the learn section, there's only curriculum aligned content. In the play section is games, but games that are helping educational outcomes, that are helping cognitive thinking, problem-solving skills.
5-year-old Shellen is in Standard 1, and after a few weeks is already showing off a new skill.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And learning on the tablet might bring her closer to fulfilling her young dream.
When I grow, I like to be a doctor.
The organization behind KaioKit is targeting and distributing 2,500 kits this year, effectively showing tens of thousands of children new avenues toward a better life. This is Ruth Almendorp for the Voice of America, Nairobi.
Now, even as Americans pause for the Memorial Day holiday, much attention is focused on the presidential contest. In what has become an unusually turbulent end to the primary campaign season, many are baffled by the daily twists and turns in the race for the White House. VOA's Michael Bowman reports.
So let's get started.
In January, Donald Trump was one of more than a dozen Republican presidential contenders in a field with no clear favorite, while Hillary Clinton stood as the frontrunner over just 2 Democratic rivals. Last week, Trump officially clinched the Republican nomination.
We've won the nomination. Big. By numbers that you can't believe.
While Clinton has to campaign hard to avoid embarrassing defeats closing out the primaries.
Thank you, San Francisco!
Making matters worse, last week's Inspector General report that her email usage as Secretary of State violated agency policies, putting Clinton on the defensive.
The use of personal email was a practice by other secretaries of state, and the rules were not clarified until after I had left. And as I've said many times, if I could do it over again, I would have done it differently.
But I watched Hillary Clinton, as I say, crooked Hillary. She is crooked. But she lies. Hillary is a disaster, folks. She has bad judgment.
Trump, meanwhile, agreed to and then turned down a proposed debate with Clinton challenger Bernie Sanders.
What I hope will happen is that, in fact, I will run against them as the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And if I do, we're going to beat them and beat them bad.
Beating Trump is one idea Sanders and Clinton agree on.
The stakes could not be higher. There is absolutely no way that we can let Donald Trump get anywhere near the White House.
But with Clinton and Sanders still battling each other, the Democratic Party is not unifying behind either. Rank-and-file Republicans, meanwhile, are showing some signs of rallying behind their nominee-to-be, leading to the first-ever polls showing Trump tied or slightly above Clinton.
And I'm leading in the polls. We're leading in almost every poll now. Do you believe this? It's so great.
Primary season ends next Tuesday when America's biggest state, California, and several others get their say. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, a safari with an artistic twist. We'll be right back.
I believe the way forward is to take a sustainable approach to address the issues that affect the Niger Delta communities. Re-engineer
as a bit of a hooligan sport, shall we say. You know, it's where women and men compete on equal terms.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Artists now have the privilege of studying a cheetah's every move and gesture at very close quarters. Now, the visitors have traveled to the continent to explore some of South Africa's premier game reserves and national parks for art safari. Their visit includes a stop at Nankuse, an hour from Namibia's capital city, Windhoek. Art safaris are open to all ages and those with or without an art experience. Namibia is one of 27 countries globally that offer safaris specifically for the creation of art. Well, next up, space might be the final frontier. But for young designers in London, it's also inspiration for out-of-this-world catwalk fashion. Now, the catwalk show also includes students from universities in Copenhagen, Berlin, Paris, and Milan, all the countries which have provided astronauts for European Space Agency's most recent missions. The fashion show is part of the Science Museum program of late-night events designed to attract an older audience to the museum, away from the usual school groups and families. Now, the ESA's head of communications stresses the show was not about creating the costumes for the latest science fiction movies, but about imagining real technological design solutions for space. Now, this infinity pool is just a part of the new multi-million-dollar leisure facilities added to Dubai's landmark hotel, the Burj Al Arab. The sail-shaped hotel claims to be the world's only 7-star hotel. And now it can also boast the world's most unique beach resort, built out of over the ocean after being built and shipped from Finland. Well, the hotel says the terrace has been designed to reflect the shape of Dubai, of the Burj Al Arab, and gives the effect of a tropical beachside location of a central walkway. There are sandy beaches, pools, and private cabins leading on to an infinity pool. The terraces are exclusively for guests of that hotel. And that's our show for today. Have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's Newswords.
Here is a story that has to do with defects or problems with cars.
Listen for the word that means to take back something. Recall.
They had meetings over this defect. They shared complaints over this defect. Yet there was no investigation by the government and no recall by General Motors until 10 years later.
Recall. It is a word that means to ask people officially to return something.
In our story, there were major problems with some General Motors cars. The man says the U.S. government and the car company took too long to issue a recall, so the cars could be fixed.
Now, when you hear the word recall, your American English will be good enough to know what this newsword means.
I'm Vincent Makori from Africa 54. This is VOA. Follow us on Africa 54. Go to facebook.com/VOA Africa 54.